Hey guys, it's Miss Crehore. I'm doing my first live videos and it's so exciting! And it's on the Civil Rights Movement, which is probably my favorite time period in American history. So, let's get started. I'm going to skip the vocab terms that I have listed for you at the top of your little packet there. So we're going to start where it says timeline with May of 1954 in the Supreme Court case, which I'm sure you all have heard about, called Brown versus Board of Education, which took place in Topeka, Kansas, or actually several cases around there. And this was a unanimous decision that banned segregation in public schools. However, it did more than just that, because it actually, the implications of it was that all segregation was held unconstitutional. So just extending beyond public schools, actually, it was to say that separate facilities for blacks and whites are inherently unequal. There's nothing about them that can or ever will be equal or constitutional. So this was a landmark case, of course. This is what people generally consider the start of the civil rights movement in the modern day. So moving on from that, this is one of my favorite side stories of the civil rights movement, and it's about a girl named Claudette Colvin, and she was 15 when she was arrested in Montgomery for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger. Does that story sound familiar to you? If it does, then it probably reminds you of another similar story, but in which Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger, which then sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. So this was taking place throughout 1955, and the boycott lasted a year. It was very successful. Dr. King was chosen to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association, which was the organization leading the boycott, and this is important for two reasons. He was elected. He was elected to this position to lead the the MIA. Meaning he didn't choose to become the face of the movement, because his success at the MIA with the boycott then launched him and propelled him to become the face and the icon of the civil rights movement as we know him to be: a great orator, an activist, an amazing leader, etc., etc., getting lots and lots and lots of attention and press. Although when he began this work and with the movement, he was nervous to take on this role. And so to me that's significant, that he didn't ask for it. It was elected upon him. But the reason that he was chosen by some of the elders in the black community in Montgomery was because they actually needed a new and fresh leader in Montgomery, because there was so much division in the black community. So they needed an outsider. Dr. King had just recently moved to Montgomery and was a great candidate because he didn't have a lot of history there already. Moving on, in response to some of this integration, Southern representatives and congressmen passed the Southern Manifesto in March of 1956. They called the Brown versus Board case a clear abuse of judicial power, and they encouraged states to resist implementing the Brown versus Board mandates, and basically their position was to say, we have states' rights and you can't tell us what to do in our state. And I really, to me, this picture at the bottom right captures a lot of the defensiveness of the South. Watching this little white girl doesn't look very pleased that Linda Brown is in her class. Again, moving on, we have the formation of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, forming in February of 1957. This was a nonviolent civil rights organization established in 57, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the first leader, and he remained its leader until his assassination. And this will continue to be a nonviolent, even as the movement starts to divide. One landmark kind of event in the integration of the South took place in Little Rock, Arkansas, in which 9 African American students supported by the NAACP registered at Little Rock Central High. And these students, pictured here, also known as the Little Rock Nine, were prevented from entering the school by Orville Faubus, who sent the National Guard to resist their entrance into the school. However, this was essentially this was complete disrespect and disregard for the federal mandates coming from Brown versus Board of Education. And President Eisenhower was put in a position where he had to defend the federal government. And because of that, he sent federal troops not only to protect the students from white angry mobs, but to enforce federal legislation. And this set a precedent for what the president could do to further civil rights. In Greensboro, North Carolina, in the early part of 1960, several colleges and high schools saw a birth of civil rights activism among their students, and several of the students from NCA&T began sit-ins at the lunch counter at Woolworth's drugstore. These were successful. As you see here, blacks sat at these counters, which previous to this would only have been reserved for white patrons. And this, again, this nonviolent form of activism was very successful. As a result of this success, a woman named Ella Baker, who was very involved actually with the SCLC, saw the passion of these students, who again were not that much older than you all, and she wanted to channel that energy into a separate organization, which became the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And the formation of this new organization reveals the growing division among the movement. Baker was a proponent of grassroots movements, and the students tended to prefer methods that would result in faster changes. So actually age here is one of those divisions in the movement, as this was a student-led organization. And this will become a grassroots organization rather than SCLC and the NAACP, which tended to be top-down organizations. Instead, Ella Baker, and you'll learn more about this, but it's a new organization coming around. Also in 1960, we see another kind of trend growing, which was the trend of Black Power as the Nation of Islam expanded, and Malcolm X, who was the country's spokesperson, spread some of their messages, which were he advocated self-defense, and his enraged eloquence really communicated the anger and alienation that many urban blacks felt. He drew many large crowds and converts, which we know was the beginning of the Black Power movement and the adoption of black nationalism. And these followers distanced themselves from the nonviolent integration movement because they believed that African Americans should seek true freedom and separation from white society and form their own nation as an all-black society. In May of 1961, the Congress of Racial Equality, otherwise known as CORE, started having freedom rides. And the freedom rides were, again, a nonviolent form of protest coordinated by CORE and SNCC to integrate interstate buses, because most states were failing to uphold the ruling in the Supreme Court case Morgan v. Virginia. Freedom Riders were extremely brave as they risked arrest, jail time, and death as white mobs led by the KKK attacked the Freedom Riders along the route from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans. The Freedom Riders never made it to New Orleans because they were forced to stop the ride in Jackson, Mississippi. You can see these last two pictures demonstrated some of the resistance they faced, whether that was arrest for simply trying to integrate the bus system, or actually mobs threw Molotov cocktails into the bus. The buses exploded. Riders were trapped inside. It was very, very violent, and that's why they had to stop. However, though, as you can see in November 1961, the Interstate Commerce Commission did prohibit segregated transportation facilities. So in that sense, the Freedom Rides were a success. One nonviolent movement that was not so successful took place in Albany, Georgia. And the thing that was lacking in Albany was, unification and solidarity among the Black community, and also there was they lacked it lacked controversy and conflict. As you saw with the freedom rides, there was lots of violence. There was at the sit-ins, the lunch counters, there was a lot of resistance. Albany was not that way. Although segregation was also fierce there wasn't a whole lot of negative publicity. And this was pretty surprising because many organizations, including SNCC, the NAACP, Dr. King, and the SCLC, came to Albany to aid the movement. But because they were lacking gains, SCLC withdrew from Albany in August of 1962 before the movement had accomplished any major victories toward integration. So this movement was pretty much seen as a failure, and it also revealed some conflict within the movement, and it grew the conflict in the movement, particularly between SNCC and SCLC. Here you see a picture of Dr. King protesting downtown businesses. Another instance of not only winning in terms of integration, but also executive power, was when James Meredith was able to enroll at Ole Miss. And after applying for 2 years without any acceptance, James Meredith and the NAACP filed a lawsuit of racial discrimination against the university. The Supreme Court ruled in Meredith's favor, but when Meredith tried to enroll, state officials defied the decision. His arrival at Ole Miss with armed federal forces prompted a riot on the campus of at least 2,000 students and others. The chaos that resulted in him trying to enroll forced the Kennedy administration to send 31,000 National Guardsmen and other federal forces to restore the order. So you see here these riots and mobs trying to prevent James Meredith from entering the university. Despite the fierce resistance, Meredith registered as the first African American student at Ole Miss on October 1st of 1962. So that is going to be where we stop for today's first video. Thanks for your patience. If you have any questions, please write them down. We will have time for questions at the beginning of next class. And y'all, I could talk about this forever, so I'm sorry, but I just really love the civil rights movement, which is great for you because it means that if you have questions, I might know the answer, or I will definitely be happy to do some research for you. So I look forward to talking to you guys more about this in class, and as always with my teaching, and especially for this unit, please make suggestions to me about things that you'd like to talk about, and I would love to take that into consideration in my class. So again, thank you, and I'll see you guys next class. Bye.